Hi, I'm Kathleen Denly, and it's my pleasure to read to you the first few pages of Sing in the Sunlight, the second book in my Chaparral Hearts series. Beginning with Chapter 1. December 3rd, 1857. The Young Ladies' Seminary, Benicia, California. Clorinda Humphrey jammed the chair beneath her doorknob and tugged the beautiful garnet ring from its hiding place beneath her chemise. Undoing the knot, she slipped the heirloom free of the ribbon that had kept it close to her heart these last 3 days. She slid the ring onto the third finger of her left hand. Or tried to. The metal caught on the thick, hideous scar that ran across her second knuckle. With determination, she shoved it past and narrowed her attention to the stone's promise. She was loved. The urge to hum swelled within her as she strolled to the window. She pulled back the heavy drapes and lifted her hand to the light filtering through the thin lace curtains. Barely a glint reflected in the deep red stone. She parted the lace, careful to remain out of view, and tilted her hand in the late afternoon sunlight below the sill. A myriad of tiny red dots danced across the walls. This was the night. She'd never be alone again. She clapped her fingertips in a quiet patter. Laughter filtered through the window pane. She froze. Had they seen her? No, the slit in the curtains was too narrow. Wasn't it? She dared a peek at the garden below. Several of her classmates strolled the paths. The girls chattered in the late afternoon sunlight, seemingly oblivious to her observation. Not girls, women, despite what their parents may believe. Like her, they'd been sent to the first female college in the West to be trained, molded, into the ladies their parents wished them to become. But they were nothing like her. All bright, beautiful, and whole, none of her classmates had ever questioned their future. Why should they? They'd never been shunned at social gatherings, nor been asked to remain behind so as not to repel the other guests. They hadn't been told they would never marry, that no man would ever want them. They'd never lain awake at night, wondering why God had abandoned them. Nor had they ever made any attempt to befriend her. And that was fine with her. Normally. Right now, Clorinda'd give almost anything for a confidant to entrust with her secret. She was bursting to tell someone. Not even Katie, her one true friend at this school, knew of her plans. Clorinda couldn't risk the young maid losing her position here. If it were discovered, she'd kept a scandalous confidence. Though she would know soon enough. The day had finally arrived. Clorinda's left arm grew warm. She glanced at her sleeve. She'd been rubbing her scars through the fabric again. With a huff, she turned from the window, tugging her cuff out of habit. She pulled on her gloves and lifted her hat from its hook, pinning it in place. She jerked the tea towel cover from the small oval mirror and examined her reflection. Her veil hung askew, allowing a rebellious blonde curl to poke out the bottom. Perhaps she should have confided in Katie. With her friend's help, Clorinda's chignon wouldn't be falling apart minutes after it had been created. She jabbed in another pin to hold the curl. Clorinda adjusted her veil so the flowers embroidered on its sheer fabric hid the left side of her face. She'd grown so used to staring through the creamy white cotton wall, she rarely noticed it anymore. If she lifted the filter, the world's colors grew bolder, the light brighter. But she preferred her muted, hazy view. She tucked the ends of the veil into the unfashionably high neck of her bodice. The haze suited her life. Or it had. Her mouth pulled to one side, smirking at her reflection. Arnie had changed all that. She lifted the timepiece from where it was pinned to her bodice. 1 hour. Her stomach fluttered as she sucked in a breath. 1 hour until she could break free of these walls, these grounds that had imprisoned her since her parents banished her here 2.5 years ago. They hadn't called it that, of course. They insisted sending her to this school was their way of ensuring she had a means of supporting herself once they'd gone. After all, it wasn't fair to expect her brother-in-law to provide for her. He would have his own family, as well as their parents' shop, to look after. A shop she'd never been permitted to set foot in, for fear she would make their customers uncomfortable. She didn't make Arnie uncomfortable. Quite the opposite. Grinning, she pictured his bright blue eyes and wavy brown hair slicked back with oil. His goatee had tickled her face the first time they kissed, but she'd gotten used to the scruff. Footsteps hurried down the hall outside her door. She darted across the room and yanked the drapes over the window, cloaking the room in near darkness. Only skinny lines of light peeked around the fabric's edges. Arnie hadn't been deterred by her veil. He saw it as a challenge, as some men were wont to do. Usually, the removal of her left glove, revealing the scars beneath, was enough to send those men running for the hills. Not Arnie. He didn't so much as flinch at the sight, nor did he laugh or mock her the way those men on the ship had when a gust of wind whipped her covering loose during her journey from San Diego. Home. She could scarcely believe she would see it again. When her parents had put her on that steamer up the coast, they'd bid her farewell with the expectation that, upon graduation, she would find a position as a teacher in some backwoods town where the community would be too desperate for an instructor to care about her scars. Instead, she'd be returning with a new husband. The look of shock on her parents' faces would be priceless. And once the truth set in, her mother might genuinely smile at her for the first time in 14 years. She ran a finger through the dust on the sill. Her parents might even let her visit their shop. After a childhood spent dusting shelves and tidying stock, she'd never imagined it possible to miss such tasks as terribly as she had after they moved to San Diego 8 years ago. Again, she wondered how their new shop differed from the one she'd cleaned in Washington, D.C. Father said the place was bigger. Her little sister Lucy claimed it was 14 steps across and 28 steps deep. But Clorinda longed to see it for herself. Lucy was almost a foot shorter than Clorinda's 5 feet 10 inches. Did she remember to dust the tops of the shelves the way Clorinda used to? Someone knocked on her door. "Miss Humphrey, are you feeling better, dear?" Miss Lemming's voice carried through the door. "Will you be joining us this evening?" Aside from Katie, Miss Lemming was the only one who paid attention to Clorinda outside of classes and recitals. It was her job to supervise the students housed in her section of the second-floor sleeping quarters. Since Clorinda had no roommate, she received extra attention. None of the other young women had wanted to room with her. Not that Clorinda minded. Sneaking out to see Arnie would have been impossible had she had a roommate. Clorinda removed the chair, careful not to allow a telltale scrape. She opened the door and feigned a wince, squinting as if the light from the hall pained her. "I'm afraid not, Miss Lemming. This headache is positively merciless. I can barely keep my eyes open, and I feel a bit lightheaded." She pretended to waver on her feet. "I think I'd better rest for the night." Miss Lemming placed a hand on Clorinda's right arm. No one ever touched her on the left. "Should I send for the doctor?" "Oh, no, ma'am." Perhaps the wavering had been a bit too much. "I'm sure all I need is a restful night's sleep. I'll be good as new in the morning. You'll see." "Well, if you're sure." Clorinda tensed as Miss Lemming peered past her shoulder, studying the room. One of the maids brought you fresh linens and a pitcher of water, I see. Does it need refilling? Miss Lemming tried to enter, but Clorinda blocked her way. No, ma'am. I've plenty. The maid was just here to refill it. Oh, well, the teacher stepped back. You will let me know if the pain grows worse or you need anything? Clorinda nodded and began edging the door closed. Miss Lemming took the hint and turned to go. I'll see you in the morning, then. Good night. Clorinda closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. The teacher's footsteps faded away. She scanned the darkened interior of the room. How much of the space had been illuminated by the hall's lamps? Could the teacher have seen Clorinda's traveling bag? She shook herself. Surely not, or Miss Lemming wouldn't have left. Clorinda lifted the timepiece again. 1/4 of an hour had passed. She groaned. How would she ever endure the next 45 minutes? And that's the end of the first scene from this book, Sing in the Sunlight, which is, again, the second book in my Chaparral Hearts series. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you are curious to see what happens next. And we'll run out and purchase your copy if you haven't already. Thanks so much for listening.